Welcome to Pods with Posh and Paul, a podcast designed to inspire and challenge listeners through story, experience and insight. To face adversity, learn from suffering and discover how to embrace life with a heart filled with love and gratitude. We are so thrilled to have you journey with us and can't wait to share your stories. Join Sue O'Callaghan and Joanne Webb as we disrupt the theory that everyone has perfect lives. Our next exciting guest is a professional speaker, international best-selling author, and expert in communication. He has worked with corporate management, sales teams, and education institutions, developing and empowering customer-centric presentation and interpersonal skills to help any manager or leader to influence more powerfully. He speaks on navigating change effectively through upgrading the number one skill set on the planet, communication. As a qualified presentation and speaker coach and mentor, he empowers leaders and managers in clarifying their message and master communication in the presentation. He is also a powerful keynote presenter using engaging stories and humour, all the while incorporating tangible outcomes for any audience. We are so thrilled to welcome Warren Tate.
Hi Warren, lovely to have you with us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on your fabulous podcast.
So, Warren, you are an expert in the art of speaking and communication, yes?
Yes, indeed. I help people transform their message to get their message heard by many rather than just speaking one-on-one. So everybody's a bit worried about, their story isn't worth listening to, whereas I work with people on mastering their message so that many people can hear it.
And you must hear so many, many stories.
Well, I'm glad you've touched on stories because everybody has a story that must be shared. And the biggest problem, there's 7.4 odd billion people on this planet. The thing that makes everybody unique is their story. Mm-hmm. And convincing people, or should I say encouraging people to get up and sharing their story is my superpower. That's what I do. And encourage people to structure their story so that it lands with their audience, so that their message can be heard and that they can help other people.
So you say that we are hardwired for story, and you say that we resonate with story, and that story is the glue that brings a presentation together. Why is it that people resonate with story, Warren?
Well, history is just a group of stories over time. So we are hardwired. It's through our primitive brain. If you go through back into biology now, unfortunately, I nerd out a little bit, so you've got the right person on the podcast. I don't just study how to tell and structure a story. I go into the biology, psychology, and the non-verbal modalities on the importance of getting the story and getting your message across. So through our hardwires, through our primitive brain, stories are key. And we tune into stories. But the other exciting part about it, the other exciting part about it is that when you tell a story, there are parts of your brain that light up. They've mapped this. They've put nodes on people's brains, and they've done it on the listener as well. And the same parts of the brain light up at exactly the same time. So we are literally wired for story, and it's called story transportation. You can actually Google it and research that. It's amazing.
And so basically, is that, do you think, because it releases a lot of emotions and it gets into the emotional part of your brain?
Well, yes, it's where our primitive brain kicks in with our frontal cortex and where we come along with that journey. So we are actually looking for story. We are searching for it because that's what we like to understand through the years and years of evolution. Story has been the key to how we have learnt. Yeah. How we've learnt new skills, how we've learnt to do things, how we've learnt through school, all of those elements, all of those things are just a session of stories. And so now we're hardwired for it. So when we hear a story that is of interest, that is something that triggers a thought in our brain, we get taken on that journey. We are transported along on that journey. And it's fascinating how it works.
And when somebody's good at storytelling or story showing, it is magic to watch, isn't it? Magic to feel.
The secret is to relive it and not retell it. So when the storyteller or shower is telling that story, the secret when you're getting your message out is you can't just try to bring it back from memory, from your brain. You need to actually place yourself back in the scene as if you're actually reliving it personally at that very moment. When you manage that, you come from the heart. It's an emotional story. It comes from the heart. You're not thinking about it. and you're reliving it. And one of the best pieces of feedback I've received is, oh my goodness, I was in that room with you as that was happening. And that's where the magic happens. Mm-hmm. And it's so, so powerful. And when you get to craft people's messages, people with amazing, amazing stories. I've heard some incredible stories of heartache, of torture, of trauma, whatever it is that people have gone through. To share that story is so powerful. And that's how you create a movement, and you create people to come behind you that are willing to lean in and help your cause.
Yeah. So very clearly the important message then in relaying that story is the way it's communicated, and that's what you're teaching, that's what you're speaking on, isn't it? The communication, it's how we present that story. Obviously there's many different ways in presenting our stories. What is it that's particularly unique about your method of teaching people to translate that so that others can be involved in it?
Well, the key is, well, we are in the business of emotion. So when you are trying to translate a message, when you are trying to have a conversation of any sort, whether it be in business as an entrepreneur or whether it be if you're trying to assist people within their movement or their cause, emotion is the key. If we touch people in the heart first, then they'll make a decision in their head whether they want to come along with you and help you or be a part of what it is that you are talking about. Yes. So emotion is the key. And we need to go deep and tap into the heart of the story. And that's when people transform. It's so fascinating. It works back to Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So you can talk about what it is that you do and what's important about that cause. How you do it is a little bit different, how you put that into play and what structure you're putting into place. But when you start to tell your why story or somebody else's why story, that's when the magic happens. You go deep into the emotion. And people transform in that very moment. And it's magical. You actually see it in the eyes of the audience.
So do you feel this is something that needs to take place are you talking about business situations, meetings, or are you talking about when we first connect with people in social situations, in normal healthy relationships? So you're talking about every walk of life?
Every single communication. See, unfortunately, these devices, the mobile phones, has dumbed us down. The smartphone has dumbed us down in regards to our communication and the art of telling stories. You don't have to go back too far in history to when some of the great poets and the great writers, the great storytellers, you can meet them in parks, you can meet them in pubs, and they'd be able to tell you and transport you on a journey by listening to them, whether it be poetry or whether it be a fable or whether it be their true life story. You go along for the journey with them. That doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't. Yes, of course, we've got books and a magnificent podcast to listen to, nice. Just like this one. But just like telling a great story is the way to transport people along with you.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's why I call it story transportation.
I love that. And you're right, there is nothing better than meeting somebody and when they tell you a story and you can't wait to hear what happens at the end, you know, you're in it with them. It's such a great gripping feeling, isn't it?
Oh, it is. But what the key to it is, you're watching them tell the story. They're not getting into their head. They're not thinking about things. They're not making it up. They're not wondering if the iron's been left on or if they've got milk in the fridge. They're immersed in that story and they're speaking from the heart. And you can tell, you read through the non-verbals of what people are saying to you and how they're saying it. You can tell if they're authentic and if they're really genuine about what it is that they are telling you. Yeah. And authenticity is the key. Yeah. You can tell if it's a bullshit story or a not so true story, sorry about that, versus one that's true and that they've experienced and lived through. And they've taken you along that journey with it because they've put you back in the scene. They're right next to you in that story. It's magical. I love it. Yeah, no, sorry, I'm pretty passionate.
No, I think it's great, and I love it as well. I love what you're saying. It's just so beautiful, isn't it? And I love what you're saying, speak from the heart, because I know you go out there and you teach people how to speak. You know, Sue and I have had your wonderful experience with it back in Sydney, which was fabulous. And I know you go out there, and I know there's a formula, but that speaking from the heart is so important, isn't it? And I love that that's your main message, because we can put it into a formula. We can get a beginning, a middle, and an end. And to wrap it all up, but it's that speaking from the heart. I think I love that message.
Also, I think that it's something you're saying can be learned and mastered, because we had my sister speaking on a podcast last week, and she works in palliative care, and she is trained in communication skills between doctors and patients, how that relationship is built on trust and how important communication is. I want to go back a little bit though and rewind. What first inspired you in terms of communication? Was it something you were always interested in as a child? Were you watching people? Where did you have an amazing person influence you? Where did you start and begin your interest in communication and story?
It's a fascinating journey, and it was working through a program with Simon Sinek, because I believed that my message was around resilience, because, as you know, I've had open heart surgery and I went through a bit of a health scare and struggled to get through all of that. But it's my journey on communication started so much earlier as a child through my sporting involvement and sporting with competing at a state and national level as a swimmer. I got to meet an amazing amount of people, Olympians and officials and so forth. And we just sit down and chat, because there's a fair bit of time in between races. There's a lot of time. They often have a break in between in the format of the structure of the event. And we are just sitting there and chatting to each other. And I was always talking to adults, always. As a child, always talking to adults and getting engaged. Whether it was a natural skill or not, I don't know. But that just transpired into what it is that I'm doing today, because I believe today more than ever, communication is vital. I don't care about any technology. I mean, we're talking over a Zoom call and so forth at the moment, but you cannot replace face-to-face interactions and communications, and that is why you look at the amount of conferences going on in the world today. You know, we're in the peak season of conference season. Yep, we can communicate on Zoom, we can watch anything on YouTube, we can listen to podcasts, we can get all of the information that we can learn from a conference, but we would prefer to go to a conference because we love interaction and personal connection. We can't survive without it, and that's been proven again. Here I go nerding out through biology and the science. From a newborn child, you need to have that connection, as you know, as mothers, from the very start. Otherwise, that child is completely disconnected with the world.
So going back to children and mothers, I look at my 4 children, Joe and I have got 8 children between us, and I look at the school education system and I think, where do we at school teach children to communicate in a healthy way? There's very little in terms of communication. We have our traditional subjects, English, maths, history, science and so on, but what about a subject of communication? Communication is critical to relationships. It's critical for our children, isn't it? And yet often we leave it till adult life to go back and rewind or undo the patterns of behaviour we've formed and realise that we can't communicate in a healthy way. Where can we go and learn to communicate properly?
I believe it's a two-way street. The parents should also have a rather large involvement in this, as well as the school system. Yes, I believe the school system is broken around all this. Absolutely. I mean, there was a news article just recently, I think it was last night, about some boys here in Melbourne, a boys' school, who were chanting on a public transport, quite a vile chant on public transport, derogatory to women. I think, where can somebody get off thinking that that's okay? Mm-hmm. You know, so I believe there's a massive communication breakdown, not only in regards to our schools, but also our parenting structure. The advantages of driving children these days. So I was anti-driving kids to school and back to picking up and dropping off and then driving to sport and picking them up, because it never happened. I was always either walking or riding my bike, but hey, that's how it is nowadays. I've got a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old. Went through all of that phase. The car, they are captive.
I agree. Brilliant.
They are captive. No phones, get off the phones and start a conversation. Yeah. It's replaced the dinner table conversation, I believe, because the days of having dinner as a family is difficult just because of timing and so forth with sport and other external commitments. So the ideal time to have those conversations that used to be had at the dinner table should be had in the car.
When they're not face-to-face, when they're next to you, when they haven't got that pressure on them, way more likely to open up as well, aren't they? It's just more of a relaxed environment when you're in the car. They're pretty chilled out, and there's amazing things that come out their mouth when they're in the car, isn't it?
I also think at the dinner table, if you have an awkward conversation, they want to get up and walk away. In the car, they can't just open the door and get out. So I have the difficult conversations in the car so they can't escape. Cars are great.
It's perfect. We used to play the question game. And obviously at a younger age, when they were around 9 and 10 years of age, and it was a question game. So we would start with, you had to ask an open-ended question of somebody. So I had my 2 boys and myself. So it would be, so what is it that you like the most about playing tennis? Because tennis was a major part of their upbringing. Mm-hmm. And so then they would have to respond with what they liked about tennis, and then they would ask a question back. So it had to be an open-ended question again. And then that conversation would stop as soon as it ended with a closed question where a yes or no answer was given. And it just enabled them to learn that to ask questions and open-ended questions of people, you can gain so much information. Now, I need to tell, I'm a storyteller, I need to tell a story. There was, I had my son, my youngest son, when he was playing a very competitive game of tennis down in Beaumaris, a bayside suburb of Melbourne. And he was having a great game of tennis, but he was also having a change of ends. And he never does that because he's very competitive. So I had to ask, when Harrison came off, I said, Harrison, that was a great game of tennis. Looks like you really, really enjoyed it. You didn't lose your cool. And you met a new friend. I said, what was his name? He gave me his name. I said, that's fantastic. So what school does he go to? I don't know. I said, so what football team does he barrack for? I don't know. What does he do outside of playing tennis? And you know, has he got brothers and sisters? I don't know. I said, so what did you speak about? Oh, me? I said, there you go. There was the trick that he learnt on that day, and to this day he remembers that lesson. If you want to know information, you need to ask questions and get the other person to speak. It's not about you.
And I teach that with my company Teenage Toolbox. When I'm teaching communication skills, I say that often teenagers will have a conversation and somebody might say, how are you? And the response is, oh, good. And it's a grunt, but there's no return of the question. So I say it's like a tennis game. You have to hit the ball to them and they've got to hit it back to you. And you've got to keep that ball going for as long as you can. So if somebody says to you, how are you? You say, good, thank you. How are you? Or how's your day? You then hit the ball back to them and you've got to keep that conversation going for as long as possible. So we do that. We do a practice exercise and they find it quite hard. But actually, you know, my teenagers' friends come to the house and we do it and they love it. They absolutely love it because they've not been taught it. And there's so many different techniques that we can learn how to communicate. Look somebody in the eye, use their name. And a lot of it is about gesture, isn't it? I mean, what's the percentage that's body language as opposed to verbal communication, Warren?
Not 93%. But I have to stop you there on that tennis analogy. That is unbelievable. My opening chapter in my book, I Get You, How Communication Can Change Your Destination, is around communication is a rally. You don't try to serve an ace, you try to have a rally. Yeah. And I use the metaphor around tennis in that entire introduction chapter. I can't believe you mentioned that. That's hilarious. Well, you must have read my book.
No, I haven't, but I'd love to read your book. But I don't even think people want to serve an ace. I think sometimes they just want to hit the ball out, actually. They actually don't want to engage, or they don't know how to. Maybe they do, but they don't have the confidence. So a lot of it is confidence. But I think you get the confidence once you've got techniques as well, don't you?
And it's practice makes perfect as well, isn't it? Because I was the same, like,
You've been practicing.
I practice all the time! No, but I was teaching kids as well. I was going into schools as a facilitator doing courses, and all mine were on communication as well. And, like, I would just play games with the kids. You know, we do the name game on your head, and I'd get some kid to stand up the front, and they had to ask open questions. You know, like that name game's normally, am I a man? Am I a woman? No, you're not allowed to ask questions like that. They have to be open-ended. And it was really surprising because kids just were really struggling with open-ended questions. They were really good at closed questions, and hence where the grunting and all of that kind of comes from in kids. But once they got into it, they absolutely loved it. It's just practice, isn't it? Go out there, practice your skills, and the more you practice, the more confidence you get.
Exactly right. I mean, my boys and I have been going to the same barber hairdresser for 22 years, and they always say, oh, we just had your boys in, they're amazing. We were chatting away, and they found out what we were doing, and we were chatting, and we just had this amazing conversation. I said, they are such a credit to you as a father and how they've been brought up. And it is a life skill, but unfortunately, yes, where all of this began, schools aren't teaching the most important skill of all, and the number one skill on the planet is communication. Yeah. And whether that be one-on-one, interpersonal, or whether that be one-to-many, it is an art form. It can be learnt, but also when you speak from the heart, that's when the magic happens.
Yeah. But hard for parents though, Warren, if they haven't learnt those skills themselves, isn't it? I mean, I know my sister that has done a PhD on communication skills. She said it's so critical for doctors that she's actually taken that as a course into the medical students to teach medical students communication skills. So I'm feeling rather that the burden of responsibility of parents is that a lot of parents don't actually understand how to communicate themselves, that we need educational establishments to start educating our children, so when their parents, in turn, they can educate their children.
I'll try and break that cycle, absolutely.
We'll try and break the cycle.
There's been study done by, it was an American study by a health insurance company in regards to lawsuits against doctors. And they did a blind study where you couldn't hear what the doctor was saying. All you saw was the doctor and their bedside manner. And they were able to predict within 90% accuracy on the viability and possibility or the propensity for that doctor to have a malpractice suit against them.
Ooh. And that's all about body language, isn't it?
Not hearing a word they're saying, just seeing how their bedside manner was, where their eyes were looking and how they were standing in reference to the patient and how they were communicating through their non-verbals. I found that fascinating. And that's hearing things like that, that's why I get so passionate about the importance of communication, the importance of non-verbals, and how we don't even know what we're saying without saying a word.
No, absolutely. And also there's that energy, isn't it? You know, that's why I try to educate my children when I go into the schools. I say, you know, when somebody walks in the room, you know whether they're in a good mood or a bad mood. And sometimes that person has never opened their mouth, yet the energy comes off them. That's how I explain to the kids that they are balls of energy as well. So if you're in a bad mood or whatever mood you're in, you know, and you can change your mood as well, you know, you can get out of it, but you know, you can feel that energy transfer, can't you? And the whole communication thing, if everybody could brush up on their communication skills, I truly believe there would be less relationship issues, less workplace issues, less bullying in schools, if people could just actually use their voice effectively and speak from the heart.
100% in agreement. And that's why I believe you'll never replace this skill, and it is the number one skill set on the planet. And to go back to the very beginning, that's where my passion comes from, because I always say communication can change your destination, and it is more stronger than any superpower, any Marvel superhero. Communication is far stronger. Has the power to start wars and finish wars, start relationships, and it certainly has the power to end relationships if you stop communicating.
So Warren, I've read that you've said your attention is the greatest gift you can give when communicating. So attention, obviously, into that comes passion, doesn't it? You're obviously very clearly a very passionate person and your attention comes into it. But there's people in life that have less passion about what they're saying. It might be in a school or university or in a conversation in business or in a friendship. So then it becomes quite hard, doesn't it? Because if there's very little attention behind the communication, then it becomes quite difficult, doesn't it?
Well, there's a skill in effective listening. So we've lost curiosity around who it is that we're speaking to. You can learn something from every single person that you interact from. Every single person, no matter what your thoughts are, whatever your preconceived thoughts are, you can learn something from everybody. You just need to be curious. As a 3-year-old, as a 4-year-old, they're curious about absolutely everything. They're looking at butterflies, they're chasing flowers, whatever it may be. They're curious, and suddenly that curiosity gets, well, through growing up, curiosity basically moves away because we don't want to be embarrassed, we don't want to show our curiosity, we don't want to show our interest in certain areas because we might be laughed at or people may think differently about us. So curiosity about every single individual that you meet is vital. And everybody has seen this, and it's fascinating. You're face-to-face, especially in a group scenario, and they're always looking for that shinier object behind you, somebody more important than who you're communicating with. They're looking for somebody else who's more important to go and communicate with. And that is so frustrating. So be present in every single communication. That's why your attention is so valuable, especially today, because, again, the mobile device. In meetings, even at a dinner table, mobile phones should never be near it. You see it at restaurants all the time. Somebody's having a beautiful interaction, a lovely date night, yet they've both got their phones on the table.
When we go out for dinner, that everybody puts their mobile phones on the table, and the first one to look at their mobile phone has to pay for the whole evening.
Well, I like the theory behind it, but there's a study again, I'm sorry, nerding out, in regards to having the phone just on the table will create anxiety within the individual. It's like, I wonder what I'm missing out on. They'll have FOMO. Oh, I wonder how many likes I got on that last post that I did on Insta today.
Yeah.
And they're thinking about it, although they know they can't touch it, but it's like, the chocolate that you're not allowed to eat yet. They really want to touch it, but they can't. So therefore, they're completely distracted yet again.
Yeah.
It shouldn't even be on the table. And it frustrates me.
Warren, you
frustrates me.
touched on something where there's a big transition in society today, isn't there? Mobile phones, devices, the internet. So I've read you say that every day we speak between 16,000 and 45,000 words. Do you think there's a change in those statistics between, say, our generation and our children's generation? Are they speaking less words because they're on social media? Is there less communication going on? What's going to be the major... Because this is the biggest change in life history, isn't it, in terms of communication? We've never had such a dramatic change in terms of attention focus, what our children are doing, what they're looking at. What's going to be the consequence in terms of the numbers of the words they're speaking, do you think?
Oh, it certainly has dropped. I heard recently, I don't know where the study was, so I need to do some research because it was only fascinating that you've said this. It was only this week on the radio that I heard that has dropped back. So that has gone down to 10,000 and 15,000 or something like that. It's dropped dramatically.
Wow.
So that's a real concern in itself, which makes sense in our digital world. But that's why making that effort to make sure that we are reaching out to people and that we are meeting as a community and coming to one, so we're practicing our communication skills. And again, I'll go reference back to, from a business point of view, why conferences are still unbelievably popular, because we want that interaction. Meetups, I mean, you've probably got 30 meetups around your local area going on tonight, and these are happening all the time because we need that interaction. We need to continually be face-to-face and communicating with each other. Digital is great. Yes, there has but not been a technology like it since the transition from radio to TV. We haven't seen anything like it. And it's still in its infancy when you think about it. Think about how many years old it is. I mean, the mobile phone as we know it, especially the iPhone, it's only 12 years old.
It's incredible.
It's not that old.
It is incredible. No, I totally love what you're saying, Warren, and I love the bit about being present and really listening to the person who you're with rather than looking for the next person, because you do get so much more out of life and it's more enriched when you do that as well, and actually having effective communication, putting your cell phones away. It's so good for our mental health as well to be doing things like that, isn't it? Because we are only here as humans for love and connection. That's what we're here for. And if we're not having that connection, what is the frickin' point?
Exactly. Well, this is something where I'm educating corporate leaders on and leaders of people in the business world to do exactly what we are doing now. So we've got the camera going on so I can see your fantastic faces. I'm seeing your expressions and how you're enjoying this conversation. Well, hopefully. But this is, yes, good smile and good laugh. Thank you. So when you are communicating to many, start using Zoom, start using FaceTime when you're having serious conversations. Don't do it over the telephone because you're missing a huge part of the communication and that interaction. Mm-hmm. So the technology is still not being used anywhere near where it should be to have that interpersonal communication. We still rely on just doing voice instead of the 55% with it, which is our facial expressions, our body language, our hand gestures, and all of those sorts of things. Use that technology to your advantage when you can't get in front of people. At least do a FaceTime call or a Zoom call. I recently taught this over in Bangalore to the top C-suite executives in IBM. Now, they manage thousands of people, and they do what they call WebEx, which is the Microsoft version, I think, of Zoom or whatever it may be. And now, not only do they do these WebEx communications, but they also stand up so they can see more of the visual of what it is they are saying when they're doing a presentation.
Cool. And don't you find that, are you finding that companies are also going along the line of allowing stories to come into their presentation as well and making it a bit more personal? Because, you know, like the CEO and the CFO, they used to just be people up there that told you what to do. Don't you find that down there, they're now trying to be more personal and bringing their stories in to show them how human they are?
The female leaders are, yes. Male leaders, not so much.
Oh, funny that.
Yeah, who knew? This is where men and leadership roles who have climbed that corporate ladder and done it over whatever years to get there are still too afraid to be vulnerable and have the real, authentic them be shown. And it's frustrating and people can see right through it. Until you show your level of vulnerability, and again, here it is, speak from the heart, be vulnerable to your team, they will then start to treat you completely differently.
I agree.
So don't be afraid to tell of your failures. Don't be afraid to tell your true stories. Don't be afraid to let people know who you really are, because that will transform you as a leader. You don't have to be a dictatorial leader these days, and it's the last thing companies want.
No, and I think that's what they're asking for, isn't it? Because, you know, like there's this big movement asking you to bring more of your feminine energy in, because, you know, like women used to always have to be ball breakers in the workplace as well, and that we're going so far away from that now, aren't we? We want people to have their masculine and their energy. Yes, you need to be masculine to run a company and to get things done, but you also need that feminine energy within all of us to be more, as you say, vulnerable, open, bring in your staff. Because once there's a more personalised bit in the workplace, everybody feels they can be vulnerable then,
and that's our message on our podcast, isn't it? Because we're encouraging listeners to be really authentic, but in that we're saying then the root of it has to be vulnerability. You have to be completely honest. You have to be connected with your truth and not just show the good bits, but also be real about the bits that are tough and hard, so that, because that's where the growth is, isn't it? You grow through the tough bits, the challenges. That's where resilience comes from.
Absolutely. And vulnerability is speaking from the heart. And it's about just showing genuinely who you are. But there's a line as well, of course. There's a line between vulnerability and therapy. and we like to keep that line quite clear, because we don't need our teams to be giving us therapy because we've opened up a little bit too much.
Yeah. We don't need to know your entire life story, but show a little bit of vulnerability.
So
well, Brene Brown, eat your heart out.
What I'm dying to ask you, what is the biggest transformation or the greatest success story you've seen through teaching communication skills? Do you kind of get follow-up? Do you follow through with people you're speaking to and teaching?
Absolutely. And it goes back to everything that we've covered off today, which is a beautiful way to summarise what we've touched on. People who tell their story and are shown their authenticity and vulnerability, they have mastered that communication piece, and they're continually being rehired. They're getting more engagement in regards to their speaking roles out there. They're getting into corporate businesses. They're getting on more stages because they're being genuine to who they are. But it must be, of course, core to their message. So I work with a lovely couple called Sarifa Yunus and Hassan Yunus. She's just released her book, #1 bestseller within 2 weeks. She's speaking on 4 stages across 4 different countries in the next month. And I have the great pleasure of coaching them basically every fortnight on mastering their message, how they're delivering it on stage, and how they can just be themselves rather than trying to be a performer on stage. And we've all seen those performers. They get up and it's all about them and don't I look good and, oh, I hope you like me and all that sort of nonsense. Getting in front of them and seeing and helping them craft their message so that they get out there and share their message to the greater world. I mean, look at the amount of people I get to coach and train. So I touch whatever hundreds or a few thousand people, probably about 10, 20,000 from the stages I speak on every year. But then by coaching and training up-and-coming speakers, multiply that out, and now I'm impacting on hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, how good is this? It doesn't get any better than that. And if I can help them share their message and get it across with confidence, clarity, and certainty, magic happens.
And clearly,
that's why I do it.
that confidence, clarity, and what was the third? Certainty. Also doesn't just translate to their business lives. It's probably feeding back, I imagine, into their personal lives, their personal relationships, their marriages, their families, and everything else as well, isn't it?
Every part of their life. Because we don't stop communicating, well, although sometimes we do if we get really shitty, but we won't go there.
I can't imagine that's you though, Warren.
Oh no, you'd never see me shut down.
Warren, you have a really, really rewarding career, and I love that. And you obviously are so passionate about what you do, and it just shines from within you. And the thing I've picked up on that I love about it is, you said you got these skills as a child, and you were curious about communication as a child when you were chatting on the sides of swimming meets and things. And I just think we forget sometimes as we get to adults what we used to love as a child, and actually if we can go back there, often that's where our passion is, and if we can embrace some of that happiness that we had as a child and that curiosity, I think we can all find fulfillment within a career. So I think you are a shining example of that.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and I believe I'm extremely fortunate to be able to have discovered that. And to realise that my ability to turn a narrative and a story around into sharing a message and making sure that it lands with those 3 C's, of clarity, confidence and certainty, I believe it's a gift that I've been given, and I just get to share it.
Well, Warren, thank you very much for being our coach and mentor. We appreciate you. We thank you for all your time today and your dedication to the greater world. And we send you much love and happiness and huge successes along the way.
And we are your greatest fans,
We are.
Thank you so much for coming on board today, Warren, and joining us.
Oh, guys, you're awesome, and what you're doing is fantastic, and keep sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being with us today. For us to inspire others to live their magnificently imperfect life, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or on your podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Pods with Posh and Pool. We can't wait for you to join us on our next episode. Love, light and peace.